think we got most of us in here. We'll go ahead and kick it off. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for joining. We've really been looking forward to this for a few weeks now, and it's exciting to have it kick off. I'll just start out by introducing myself and Route. For those of you who are not familiar, my name is Pete Richter. I'm a senior recruiting strategist with Route Networking Group. And Route Networking Group is a third-party corporate recruiting agency. We work exclusively with Idaho companies and connecting them with exceptional talent. A question I get a lot when I tell people I'm a recruiter is they say, so Pete, you're a headhunter then, right? And essentially, yes, I'm a headhunter. With that said, we don't really like the term headhunter. It's a bit aggressive. It implies that we hunt down human capital purely for personal profit. We like to think of ourselves as professional matchmakers, dedicated to helping Idaho companies connect with top-tier career-driven talent. And although recruiting is at the core of what we do, we help clients in a variety of other ways. We help them with competitive salary benchmarking. We help them with compensation reviews. We also help them define or redefine interview processes with the goal of creating a positive candidate experience. And we even are on the ground floor with helping new companies or startup companies get off the ground by helping them build out interviewing and recruiting processes and helping them hire their first employees. So why did we decide to do a webinar? Well, today, what we want to do is share our experiences of fellow HR professionals and hiring managers, more specifically, what we and others have done to adapt in today's times. We like to share some tactile ways with how to move forward with all things hiring, interviewing, onboarding in the digital world. And we'd like to help you develop a long-term strategy to propel your organization forward immediately, as well as post stay-in-place orders. So before we move into the slideshow, I'd like to introduce the team. So there I am at the top left, and to my right is Jessica Cafferty. She is the founder and president. To the right of Jessica is Ollie Musekamp. He's our director of operations. Then our other recruiting strategist on the bottom left is Bianca Tovar. And then we have, to the right of her, Zoe Sheely, and then we have John Hosmer, and then our recruiting intern is Sydney Anderson. So what are the goals of today? Ideally, we want this to be very fun and engaging. I know that there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of webinars you can join. We hope this is a little bit different. We'd like to encourage your participation. Part of what we'll be doing is, asking questions. We'll pause for you at the message board. Feel free to put any questions or comments or any ideas that you might have. And then we want you to feel, energized about the possibility of hiring again and excited about the opportunity that the current environment holds. And lastly, we want to give you, instill the knowledge that RNG is here to help and support you and your team however we can. Part of making this fun and engaging is we have a little bingo board, and I'm going to pass this over to Zoe. She's going to talk that through for you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Pete. So as he just mentioned, we want this to be really fun and engaging, which is why we've created a bingo board, which everyone should have. And I also added it to the chat, but here it is right here. So for every complete bingo you get, your name will be entered into our drawing for a $50 gift card at Flying M and a gift card good for 2 Frosé containers from our friends over at Western Collective, which I will say are very dangerously delicious, and be careful if you win those. Anyways, I think we all know how to play bingo, but before we move on to our webinar content, I wanted to call out a couple of Zoom functions that correlate with the board. So real quick, if you hover your mouse over your video screen, a handful of icons are going to appear at the bottom. You'll see the chat function, which we'll be using a lot today. So just click on that, and that's where we can all, yep, Bianca just added something there. Anyways, we'll also be, mute and video. Make sure your mute's on. There's a bingo square for that if it's not. So just remember that. In video, if you hover above next to video, you can add a virtual background, which I'm going to do right now, so you guys can get a bingo square. And lastly, if you don't have the bingo board, as I mentioned, it's in the chat, but it's also posted to all of our social media networks, including LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And with all of that being said, I'm going to get us started in the chat by asking everyone this: why did you join our webinar today? Thanks, everyone, and I'm going to hand it over to Ollie now.
Hi, everyone. First off, excuse my personal grooming. I've never had my hair this long before, so you're kind of getting a taste of what Ollie looks like in college. But I promise once the barbershops open back up, this will be reduced. The next couple of slides, I'm going to show you a couple of charts. I promise it will be painless. But I really want to set the stage of the economy right now in terms of the unemployment in the US and in Idaho, so we can gain a better understanding of what our current conditions and how to navigate and proceed from here. Okay, first graph. This is showing the unemployment rate from the year 2000 to current, and you can see during the Great Recession of 2007 through 2009 up to 2010, at the peak, unemployment was around 9.6%. Now, mind you that this took around 2 years to achieve, and for reference, the Great Depression of the 30s, we saw an unemployment rate of around 25%. You fast forward to April 2020, and we're seeing an unemployment rate of around 15%, after seeing a 50-year low of 3.5% in February. Forecasting firm Oxford Economics is predicting a 60% unemployment rate in May, which was actually recently echoed by the White House Chief Economic Advisor, Kevin Hassett, who said on Sunday that we may see an unemployment rate that approaches rates we saw during the Great Depression. So the state of the economy right now is not in the best shape. We all know this, but this is what the data is telling us. So slide. The next graph is showing the number of employment claims, from 1967 to current. And you can obviously see in April 2020, totally shatters everything historically. We've seen over 26 million Americans lose their jobs and file for unemployment, which is unprecedented. I think that's a bingo square. And the initial wave of job losses were concentrated, as you might imagine, in retail and hospitality sectors and personal services, but this is reaching its arms and hands into suppliers and other industries. Next slide, please. Okay, now for Idaho, we've seen over 100,000 applications for unemployment. This is mostly concentrated in Ada and Canyon counties, and it's actually affecting the millennial age group, so 25 years of age and younger, which is interesting, and more women than men by a couple percentage points. Slide. Again, you can see the graph here. It's mostly Ada and Canyon counties there in the map of Idaho. But the hardest hit sectors, which is probably not surprising, is accommodations in food services, healthcare, social assistance, retail trade, but it's also affecting manufacturing, administrative support, and construction. And official numbers haven't been released yet, but the Statesman is predicting an unemployment rate around 12%. And yes, this is a lot of negative news, I know. But is this truly surprising? I don't think so, and please chime in the chat if you do. But restaurants and bars and the non-essential businesses have been mandated to close. The healthcare sector, hospitals are not performing non-emergency or elective surgeries, so these sectors are just being crushed. But we're confident once we reinstate the phasing program that Governor Little has outlined for us starting May 1st, that workers will be rehired and a lot of these numbers will be reduced. And also, other good news is that Idaho, in particular Boise, is growing. Remember all those headlines, like Boise's the fastest growing city in the nation, or Boise's the best place to live according to millennials. Like, these all still ring true. And this can be reflected in our housing reports, in our housing market. Inventory is really low. Real estate agents are reporting multiple offers for houses. We're seeing record home prices. And in March, a single family home cost $365,000. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Pete, who's going to talk about a macro view of economic cycles.
All right, so we're going to take kind of a macro view at economic recessions, and more specific, we're going to look at the emotional factors that kind of play into these situations. What we recently experienced was somewhat of a bubble burst, right? We're told to stay at home, business can't go about as usual. There was the housing market bubble burst in 2007, and these things they're reoccurring throughout time. So this isn't anything new in a sense what we experience, although it is unique. And as you can see at the graph there at the top there, just before a bubble burst, you see at the top left excessive optimism. And usually, coming out of a bubble burst, you see excessive optimism. And at the bottom, you see excessive pessimism. So what happens right when we hit the crash, the breakdown? Well, usually there's a lot of emotional decisions that are going on. And this is where you find that people are eerily predictable. And this is through businesses, as individuals. And what you see is, cash, and the first thing that happens is credit and cash start drying up. Production slows. We lose confidence. Right there at really when it starts to hit, layoffs begin, more worry, excessive fear and panic. And what's interesting is it's very predictable. This is human nature. And where you need to think about is how do you position yourself for the upturn? Right down there where excessive pessimism exists, if you can overcome that and be ahead of your competition, ahead of your peers, whatever that might mean, it's about managing the emotional decisions behind what's going on. And of course, it's scary, I get it, but if you can come up with a strategy and communicate this with your team members, you're much set when that starts to rise. And you don't know what's going to happen, but ideally you can position yourself that you're ahead, that you can get ahead of the scrambling to buy, higher prices. The hiring becomes tougher. There's less people on the market. So, think about it in the sense that this will happen again in the future, and it's time to recession-proof yourselves. So next slide, please. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, fear. I'm sure you guys can feel it everywhere, right? It spread quicker than the coronavirus itself through social media outlets. It was almost immediate. There's a lot of fear and panic going on, and it's contagious. It makes us delusional. It can be debilitating. Fear has been used as a tool of oppression for eons. I'm curious. I want you guys all to think about maybe a nightmare that you've had. I had this reoccurring nightmare, and the setting is I'm a senior in high school. At the time, when I was a senior in high school, I had extreme senioritis. A little bit of kind of moving slow, and I went in this dream. I come to the realization that the whole semester I have missed 2 classes. I haven't been turning in homework. I didn't get to my tests, and there's this complete panic, and it almost wakes me up from my dream. It's debilitating. It just completely demoralizing because I'm like, oh man, I ain't gonna have to keep going to school, and I think I'm done. And that fear exists past my dream. I wake up, I'm sweating, I panic, and it takes me a couple minutes to come to. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was just a dream. I haven't had this dream in a while. I hope it doesn't come back, but I'm curious if you guys could put comments on the board. Talk to people. I feel like this is a familiar dream for other people. So if you would comment on that. And here's what fear, can do in a nutshell. Here's fear in a nutshell for 2020.
Oh my God! Oh, fire! Oh my goodness! What's the procedure? What do we do, people? Oh, how did that happen? Down in the hall. No, we don't know that. The smoke could be coming through an air duct. Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm! Wait. Okay, we're trapped. Everyone for himself. Okay,
So, it's a little exaggerated, but it's pretty real, right? That's what fear does. It causes a lot of panic and terrible decisions. So let's next slide, please. Oh, sorry about that. It's okay. We'll leave it there. So, one thing I think you guys have heard a lot is the word used lately is unprecedented. It's a common use, and I don't like the word unprecedented for what we're dealing with. It really drives fear. I like to change words up. It really helps with managing fear. And I think of our situation as more being unique. Of course, this is the first time where we've had to work from home for an extended period of time, where we can't go to restaurants and enjoy life like we usually do. But as far as unprecedented goes, things like this do happen throughout time. We've seen it, right? World War II, 65 million people estimated to lose their lives. There was the Spanish flu that was a 3-year period where I think it was 17 million to 100 million people estimated losing their lives. There's been reoccurring economic recessions, the Great Depression, the 1973 oil crisis, the Great Recession in 2007. So these are things that we should be prepared for, right? But ultimately, we let fear take hold of us. These are short-lived. They're usually a few years in time. Let's just say that this economic downturn lasts 3 years. That would be about 3.8% of the average American lifespan. And yeah, that blip in time, it carries heavy implications that will change the way we operate business. And the trick is to stay ahead of the curve and be ready to ride the wave up. Since 1900, the average recession in time has actually been about 15 months, where since the 1900s, the average recession or average expansion in time is about 48 months. So we spend 3 times the amount of time during economic expansions and good times and the market riding up. And so you see these dips and you see these dives, but really the market is continually trending up. So, instill that confidence that it'll get back to normal. Time exists in the now, and it only moves forward. So what are you going to do? How are you going to deal with fear? Well, first thing is be easy on yourself. Fear is natural. It's instinctive, right? It's the fight or flight response. It's okay to have fear, and it's going to be relentless. You're going to deal with fears throughout your life. And what I would suggest is addressing your fears. Make friends with it. Learn why you have fear. If you can understand your fears, your emotional decisions will be more, they'll be more strategic. You'll understand why you're doing things. One thing I like to do, I've dealt with a lot of fears in my life. I lost my mother when I was 15, which has challenged the fear with me of losing, friends and loved ones. I made a huge career change just before coming here to Route Networking Group, where I spent 4 years of college and 7 years of professional experience, and went in a completely different direction. It was a year and a half before I built up the confidence to actually take the leap and change over. And, talk about fears with your team members. It's okay to reach out to maybe your team members that you trust. Have those conversations about the fears that exist in your organization. I've gone to counselors. I've read books on Buddhism. I think there's a lot of good literature out there that's really helpful for you to understand what fear is and how it can affect you, and give you ideas and strategies of how to overcome it. There's one quote I really like by Mark Twain. I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which have never happened. I'm curious, comments, how many times have you guys worried about something that never comes to fruition? I feel like it's a recurring thing for a lot of people. There's another really great quote that I like, and it's by Alan Watts. The art of living is neither careless drifting on the one hand, nor fearless clinging on the other. It consists in being sensitive to each moment and regarding it as utterly new and unique, and having the mind open and wholly receptive. And I think that really rings true to our current situation. This is very unique. There's a lot of fear out there, but are you going to be a proponent of fear, or are you gonna be someone who kind of challenges fear and takes it on? With that said, I'm going to transition over to Jess here. She's going to talk a little bit about transparency and culture.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. And I almost made the mistake of starting while on mute. So I almost did you a favor and got you another bingo square, but not today. Wanted to first thank everybody again for joining us. It's really nice to see everyone, and can't wait till we can reconvene. Hopefully we'll have a cornhole tournament to reconvene here in the next couple of months. As Pete mentioned, I think the first thing I'd like to just kind of take a second and turn to the chat. I'd love to hear how everybody else is dealing with fear, and even if it's not fear, if it's just the overall circumstance. This has been, not to reiterate for the millionth time, but unprecedented, and like Pete said, unique. And I'd love to just kind of get some feedback from people on chat on how that's going. One of the things that we as an organization had to do, and really candidly to open up a little bit more, myself, when everything started to transpire with COVID, it was a very scary moment. And I think, for us, I had to take a step back and realize, man, transparency is a value of ours. It's something that we had to start with. And that was where we were going to, make decisions on moving forward. So John, will you hit to the next slide actually for me? And that's where we kind of bring here, right? And at the time of chaos and in the time of a pandemic, as we're seeing now, are your core values ringing true? And for us, that was one of the first things that came to mind was, we've always preached to one another that we're transparent. We communicate early, we communicate often, we have open and direct conversations with one another. So when everything started happening with COVID, that was something I had to do with our team. And as soon as I knew and I started looking at the financial statements, we started getting emails from clients that were like, wait, we're going to pull our hiring strategy completely. We're going to pause. We're not going to hire. We had a very real come to Jesus moment, if you will, here. And I think that was just the way that we could then process together and move forward. And then everybody on the team could equally understand the kind of gravity of the situation. And I want to transition next, and I'm really excited to introduce Bobby Powers from Gravity Payments. And I know he has a similar story of how living their values of transparency and direct communication help them through this. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Gravity Payments, they're a credit card processing and financial services company, and they've seen quite a bit of success. They help a lot of small to mid-sized businesses across the country process credit card payments. And Bobby, I love that he includes in his bio that he reads over 70 books per year, many of them pertaining to business and leadership. And he's currently the head of human resources and organizational development at Gravity. And I'm really excited to have him here. So Bobby, I'll let you take it away. And thanks again for being here.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me here. So as you mentioned, transparency is ever more important now than it's ever been before. And I completely echo what you said, Jessica, that times of crisis like this really showcase exactly what your culture is like. It amplifies anything that you're doing well and anything that you're doing poorly. And a couple internal cultural values that we've had at Gravity really ever since we started were transparency and autonomy. And this crisis has tested both of those. And I think in many ways have given us some really interesting case studies for how we live those values out. So as soon as the coronavirus started to really pick up in the States, just like that office clip showed earlier, I love that video. As soon as it started to pick up, it really started to impact small businesses all across the country. And Gravity, like Jessica mentioned, we work with small businesses in all 50 states. We process credit card transactions for them and help them get set up with the tools that they need to accept payment for their services. And what's interesting about Gravity is we exactly mirror the small business economy. So as small businesses make money, we make money. If small businesses don't, then we don't. And so we have been able to see through our 20,000 some merchants an exact view into what's going on in the American economy, and businesses are down about 55% on average. And so as we started to see those numbers come through, our executive team got together and started to talk about what are we going to do about this. And the immediate decision was, we're going to take this to the whole company. We're going to take this to all 200 employees. We're going to pull back the covers on all the financials. We're going to explain what our revenue has done, that it's down 55% now. We're going to explain what our expense management looks like. And we're going to create a bunch of different small groups of employees in groups of about 10 people per group to get together and talk about what they think we should do amidst the crisis. And what came out of that is that we ended up making the radical decision as a company that we would send out an anonymous survey to every employee and give every employee the chance to decide how much their own salary they wanted to cut to help our company weather the storm. So we talked about the amount of money we had, the amount of loan that we had with our bank that we could take out anytime we needed to, and what runway it looked like for the company going forward. And then employees made the decision of how they wanted to adjust their pay for the next month to help us get even longer runway. So it was really radical to see that as an employee, as a manager of the company, and to watch the way our people banded together. And it was all because we had the transparency to pull back the covers and the autonomy to let people decide what they wanted to do.
That's awesome, Bobby. And I really appreciate you sharing that story with us. And it's, it's hard, I think, to be vulnerable, not only as a business owner for myself, but also as a leader within a company, right? It's hard to kind of open up and have those conversations, not only within your team, but now we're taking that a step further and we're going to share it with everybody on the call today. But I really appreciate that you did. And I know, for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, since being able to have those conversations, it's given me this confidence moving forward. And it's like, now we've gotten down to the bare bones and we can build ourselves back up. So, I'd love to hear from other people. Do you guys have any questions for Bobby? We'd love to throw out at least one for him. If you guys have anything that you want him to cover, please feel free to chime in the chat box. I'm sure he's happy to answer anything about how that conversation went and when they did it. And or just how things have been continuing on at Gravity. So feel free to chime in there. We'll give people a few minutes.
And just one note too, as people are typing in questions. So I know if you were like me going through that whole scenario, you would probably be really curious, how did employees respond? And we actually had 98% of people end up cutting their own pay.
Wow.
And it doubled our runway as a company for where we would end up being able to get through as a business and feel really confident with where we're headed from here. So we've been able to use this as a chance to really double down on those values, test the values and see that they stand up under it. And then also a lot of the small businesses we serve, they've heard that story and they've been motivated by that. And so that story has given us the chance to even go reach out and win new business that we never thought we'd be able to do, which is really great.
Yeah. Well, and I think as an organization, you guys do a great job of publicizing some of the decisions you've made. Obviously, Dan, who's been, very kind of widely known for the decision he made to cut his salary and to raise, your base pay up to $70K. And I think that's, it's smart. It's a really smart kind of business decision. It's not just an ethical decision, And we do have a couple of questions coming in. Petra had a question. Petra, do you want to go ahead and chime in with your question?
Yeah, actually, so I have two, and I really like Pete's too. So that 98% of people were willing to cut their pay. What was the average amount that they cut? And was there a timeline on the reduction? Like this will be for 2 months, 3 months, or was it just, you're going to start this and it'll go on indefinitely?
Yeah, great questions. So the company, we gave all of the employees the information that they needed to make those kind of decisions on their own. And we had I think it was about 10 employees that said they were willing to cut their pay 100%. And we actually didn't even take that. We said, we're not going to cut anyone down 100%. That's absurd. But we gave a more conservative cut. And the way it was handled basically was that we published like what our deficit was, which was about $400,000 we were trying to make up every month with our payroll. And we said, if people in these different pay bands were to take pay cuts of about this amount, and it was kind of a progressive pay cut amount, that we would be able to make up that $400,000 gap and extend our runway longer. And so through that, I don't know what the exact average was, but I would guess it was right around like 20% or so. And the initial timeline was for the first month, and that we would reevaluate after a month. So that month actually comes due this week. We have another all-employee meeting tomorrow. We're sharing where we're at now, a month into the crisis since making this change. And then we're going back to employees and saying, hey, we got this PPP loan. So that now extends the runway and that adjusts the spectrum. But we are planning to just basically have this be an ongoing basis every month or couple months, go back to employees and say, hey, what do you think we should do amidst this crisis?
That's awesome. And thank you, Petra, for asking the question. Bobby, again, I can't thank you enough for being here and for sharing that story. We'll definitely be looking for more insights from you and the team at Gravity and how you're navigating this situation. For everybody else on the call, please feel free to continue chiming with questions. We'll make sure that Bobby gets those and that we can send those out to everybody on the call. So thanks again, Bobby.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So now I would love to hear from people. I think the next slide we've got is really to give everyone a chance to share. Are your core values helping guide your decisions through this process? How are you charting the course forward? And what does the transition look like? Please feel free to chime in with any stories you can share with us about how you've been using your core values. I'd love to hear, even if you found, gosh, we had a core value of the customer is always right and it's not working out, so we're looking at pivoting. I'd love to hear any of those examples, because I think that now is a really epic time to consider, are our values true to who we are as an organization, or are they what we wish our values were, or what we would had hoped or thought our values might be? So, feel free to chime in questions or anything like that. I want to be conscientious of time and move forward, but we'll keep an eye on that chat box. Bianca is our chat master, so she's on top of things. All righty, we'll move to the next slide. So, yeah, the next kind of piece of actually what I want to cover is really broken up into 3 different sections. And hopefully many of you have received the infographic I sent. This is a very written up version of one of those. But that is also on our social channels. It'll be popping into the chat here. Zoe's on that. but I'm going to be covering a lot of what's in this infographic, and it's broken up into 3 different sections, and that is how to attract or interview talent, how do you onboard talent, and then lastly, how do you continue to engage with your current team and your culture, building your culture all in a digital environment. And I think, many of us on this call are hopeful that we'll be able to return to our offices and return to work in the near term. But I think we also all recognize that that's going to very likely look different than what it had pre-COVID. And I wanted to give everybody some tools for what you could use in order to do all 3 of those things. And if at the worst case, you have to do it all remote or all virtually, you can use those tools to be able to do that. Or best case, you can do it all in person. You can still probably pull some tools from that. So with that said, the first thing here is, the hiring side of things, attracting people. So, I think one of the things to keep in mind here when it comes to attracting talent and hiring is that, like we saw on all these slides, unemployment is high. There are lots of folks out there that are actively looking for jobs. However, one of the things that remains to be seen is how many of those that are currently unemployed, once things reopen, are going to be heading back to their jobs. How many of those were furloughed? How many of those, are in, either hospitality or food service, they're servers, how many of those are in, they're small business owners themselves. So there's a lot of kind of influential numbers that are impacting unemployment right now. That's something that's on our minds as we consider how do you attract talent. And so with that being said, as is true of all the time, it's really crucially important that you're working on a strategy that's going to help you attract the right type of talent to your organization, meaning not everybody is going to be a fit for your group, right? So a couple of pointers here, and again, I'll strongly urge you to consider the infographic because there's a lot of content there. It's very verbose, I apologize, but at least hopefully you get some ideas. The first thing I'll say is you want to start early. Just like when you're hiring in person or pre-COVID, now you want to give yourself a good buffer amount of time. Not only do we obviously probably recognize that as on our own side of things, but from a candidate standpoint, a lot of candidates are very reluctant right now to move quickly. Number one, because they, are uncertain with the time, but also because I think there's, a lot of general kind of weariness out there. So I'd give yourself at least 8 weeks when it comes to considering when you want to make a hire. And with that, even if it's going to take you longer, I would say start having those conversations and continue the conversations rather than waiting and then seeing and then trying to rush through a process or getting desperate. The next piece of that is social media. It's really some interesting data is coming out about social media right now. And this is actually dated from March numbers. So I'm actually guessing that we're going to see even bigger numbers in April. But Facebook usage is up 27%. TikTok is up 16%. I'm really glad to announce that Pete has nominated himself to start our TikTok account. So that'll be really cool to see. Keep your eye out for Pete on our TikTok account. Nextdoor, the neighborhood app, is up 73%. And House Party, which is a group app, is up 79%. So some interesting usages that you're seeing increase. I don't have Instagram, but I'm guessing like Facebook, it may even be grouped in there since Facebook owns them. That you're seeing a lot of people on their phones and on digital platforms. And what's also interesting about that is that a lot of these large enterprise companies have pulled their budgets. So sponsorship cost is actually down. And you can, if you're sponsoring any kind of post right now on Facebook, Twitter, looking at doing something on TikTok or Snapchat, those costs have gone down because, again, these companies have pulled their budgets. So it's a great time that if you have content you want to put out there and sponsor, it's a great time to do so. The only caveat there is that LinkedIn has not seen that same change. So their prices have stayed about the same as what they were pre-COVID. So anyway, I'm going to launch into a bunch of more ideas here on this hiring side and interviewing side. Ultimately, I think the biggest piece of advice is come up with a process, start and have a process, and then send that process to candidates. For us personally, that means we create an outline for what that process is, and we send that to every single candidate that moves to the first round of interviews. And then they know, okay, I've got 5 subsequent steps that I'm going to go through in order to make it through to getting an offer. So anyway, that's one thing I'll say. I think it's really helpful for candidates to know what to expect. Lastly, I'm going to kind of breeze through a few of these. Again, look at the infographic, but hosting a house party. We just saw house parties up 80%. It's a great way to have a game and do something that's not just interviewing. Other ideas that we have are always kind of related to engaging with candidates. A, outside of just a Zoom meeting, but B, also how can you engage with them and also get a real life application of their ability to do the job. So a good example I'll give you is, for our marketing intern, we actually have the marketing intern submit a piece of writing sample ahead of time. And we also have them build a fake Instagram account with their first 6 posts of what they would do if they were the marketing intern for Route Networking Group. I know there are other companies out there that do something similar. You can have them create, a campaign. We have a client of ours that hires, some high-level salespeople, and they'll have them do a remote sales presentation online and record themselves doing the presentation. So again, just some ideas there. Written submissions, I think, are always helpful. We're always looking for great, candidates that can communicate with written communication. So, give them a case study and have them respond to it, or give them an email template, have them build off of that. Anything kind of along those lines. So I'm going to take a quick little pause here. Now that I covered a ton as it relates to hiring, and see, hey, Bianca, how are things going in the chat side of things? Any questions that have come up or anything going on there?
Yeah, I don't know the name here. It's our port in here. Grant?
That's Rants.
Rants. Okay, awesome. They asked, as a business, what kind of material do you release on TikTok?
Great question, Rants. I mean, the world is your oyster. I think ultimately my guiding principle would be make sure it's true to your values. But, for us, one of our values is to have fun and enjoy what we do. And, Pete is an epic dancer, as many of you may have seen when we were getting on the call here. And I think, as long as what you're creating is true to who you are, again, the world is your oyster. There's a lot of different ideas out there too. I was looking, actually, you can get ads on TikTok and you can kind of run through and see what kind of businesses are posting. So that's another idea to look through and see, kind of look at company pages.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions here?
Corinne also asked a question as well. I'm not sure if you want to get on, Corinne, and ask.
Sure, Corinne.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. So when hiring, and we're remote typically, so we have always been kind of exploring ways to get projects from folks as a part of the process. We're actually making a marketing hire right now, and I loved your idea about Instagram and having them do the 6 sample posts. Do you ever get advice? Are people legally allowed to work on things during the hiring process, that are tied to your business, even if it's fake or something like that? I'm just curious if y'all have any insights there.
It's a great question. My first caveat is I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to say that I'm not qualified to give legal advice. But what I can tell you is that I wouldn't recommend, we've had a couple of clients that have said, hey, post these to our Instagram accounts, or we will give you our Instagram login information, and then we want you to perform certain tasks, right? Or I've had other clients, and not necessarily clients, I guess, I've heard of other companies having a sales rep go out and sell on their behalf as a part of their interview process. I'm getting kind of some shaking of heads there. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend instead doing activities that can mimic that, or can demonstrate that knowledge, right? So if you're gonna do, I know a lot of people that if you're gonna hire an outside salesperson, instead of having them go out and actually having to do the cold calls themselves, instead have them go out with that rep and see what that's like and kind of feel out that opportunity, and then have them do the actual cold call with the representative, not in front of a potential client and not on the behalf of the business. Does that help? Does that give kind of a distinguishing factor there?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions out there? I'm wondering if Ollie, I thought you might have a question for me.
Yeah, howdy team. It's me, two-time and buckskin Billy. And I've got a question for you. These are all great ideas to onboard a new hire, but we're at a loss on how to train a new hire remotely. Do you have any ideas?
It's like we set you up or something. Gosh, you've led me to the perfect next step on talking about onboarding. So thank you. Two-time, and I don't even remember what your name was.
Buckskin Billy.
Buckskin Billy, thank you. You know what, Rance, I actually think he's giving you a run for your money.
Yeah.
So. All right, so that moves us on to onboarding, right? So I think the biggest takeaway here is don't wait to future-proof your company. Get everything in place now so that worst case scenario, you're at least prepared for if or when you need to make that next hire, and you might have to do it completely digitally. Again, I'll point you to the infographic. I've gone through and really highlighted a lot of practical considerations, but then I've also just highlighted just some other things to keep in mind in order to help make that process efficient. From a practical standpoint, you know, electronic signatures, making sure you have offer letters that can be signed by DocuSign, making sure that you have a secure file sending platform. I think that one's really important. We definitely don't want to be opening up you or your organization to anything bad being leaked. I've included some ideas there. Our accountant uses features, if nothing else, password protected PDF. You know, one of the other things is doing an electronic handbook and some ideas there. If you can't all, you know, PDFs and send it over to somebody, that's great. You could also print one out ahead of time, bind it, and then have it sent to them, have a physical copy sent to them. Another idea that I love is actually creating a welcome video and having different employees record themselves saying, hey, welcome to the team, Corinne. Welcome to the team, Rance. We're glad to have you, and compiling that into one video that you can send over to the candidate on their first day. Again, just another way for them, he or she, to feel welcome. Another big one I think is really important is creating a schedule. When you're having somebody join your team or remotely, I think it's just even more important that he or she have a lot of times booked out in their schedules, even if that's just for other tasks that they'll be doing at their computer on their own. We'll have, you know, a good example of that is you might even have a peer send them their schedule or a sample schedule of what a week in the life looks like, so that they can kind of map out how should I be spending my time and where should I be spending my time, and also load up their calendar as well as yours if you're a hiring manager with additional meetings, more than you might think, because I think that's also really important here. So other considerations, a new hire questionnaire. Make sure you're getting to know your new hire. And a lot of times, you know, we get to know them over this water cooler talk. That doesn't exist now. So how are you going to find out what their favorite restaurants are, how many kids they have, what are their kids' ages, what schools do they go to, what's their favorite coffee? You know, I don't care what the questions are, but create a little questionnaire, send it to them, and then you have all that information. You can send them a gift card to their favorite lunch spot, or you can send them a gift card for their favorite coffee drink, whatever it may be. Other things I'm just going to point out here, I'm skipping through a couple of them. You know, we require our team members to read Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, which is a book, a sales book. And for anybody that we're going to onboard in the next several months, I'll tell you that's going to make sure it makes it to them. Make sure you get their computer set up ahead of time. That can take some time. So again, bake some real time into this process. And then lastly, you know, swag seems obvious, sending them company t-shirts and things like that, but everybody's at home. Why not send it to the family too? Send some so their kids can wear your hats or your shirts or stickers or what have you. Get everybody excited about the fact that they might be joining your team. All righty. And I'll again take another pause here. Zoe, what's going on the bingo board?
Things are looking good. I'm getting close to a bingo, which I don't even know if I can enter into the contest, but I don't know. I feel like I should be able to.
I've got some bad news for you, Zoe. I think RNG members are disqualified.
Okay, but just to like speed things along, just in case, I myself am cracking a beer. So go ahead and I can check that one off.
Yeah, there you go. Did you cheers the camera?
You gotta cheers the camera.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Good deal. Awesome. Well, you guys don't forget to submit your bingos to us. There's no limit. So if you get, 10 squares going different directions, that counts for 2, and we'll do the drawing. And I'll give you guys until the end of the day. So get it to us by the end of the day, and we'll do the drawing. We'll announce the winner tomorrow morning. All right. Well, last piece of this is, how do you engage with your team and enhance your culture from, again, from a virtual environment? It's just as important that we continue to keep our current team members in mind, especially for some of us that, very likely need to wait to make that next hire. So how do you make sure that even though you're miles apart, you guys still feel like the team and have the camaraderie that you did when you were in the office? And this is something that our team has definitely been working on as well. So one of the first things I do want to point out, and I point this out on that infographic, is that mental health is important. I would double check and find out for sure that your current healthcare plan includes mental health coverage. And if it does, make it accessible and normalize it for your team. One of the things that we talk about a lot as a team is that, if we're struggling through something, if we're dealing with anxiety, if we're dealing with anything that could be impacting our emotional health, we talk about it and we normalize the fact that we would go see somebody about it. And that's, I think, really important here. It's okay to have those discussions and to say, yeah, maybe, I went and saw a therapist. I really liked him. And I think that might be a great opportunity for you as well. Outside of that, I think the other piece of that is, can you provide a subscription to Calm or Headspace or another application out there and allow your team members to use that? I think there are a lot of great meditative apps and other ways of kind of, again, calming our teams down here that are great resources. It's interesting. Thrive Global released a survey, and they did a survey of 5,000 plus employees across all different industries. And they found that 80% of the employees they surveyed reported more general stress and anxiety due to the outbreak. And 80+% of those want their employer to be doing more to help them feel resilient and empowered. So I think a lot of that dovetails with what we're talking about on the mental health things, but also just in terms of engaging with your team. So I've, again, included a lot of different ideas here. I think one of the big ones is just making sure you're taking time and allowing your team more time to connect with each other. And allowing also, I think, previous to COVID, we get into a meeting and it's like all business. This is the agenda. We're going to cover it. And we want to be as efficient as possible. Well, I think, for our route, personally, we've had to evolve a little bit and be conscientious of the fact that it's okay for us to go on tangents, and people need that time. They need that time to connect. Oh my God, Aussie Tracker is in the building. I don't know if you guys can see Ollie yet, but oh my. So I'll cruise through this because I'm curious what this guy's got to say. One of the other things I think is great is sending care packages. We schedule happy hours here every other Friday or thereabouts, or once a month. And I sent Western Collective, I sent Frozes to everybody. And I think, again, it's just a fun way to engage with your team and have them feel like, hey, you know what, I care, or sending them a gift card, sending them whatever it may be. I think the other thing is encourage giving back to the community. Make sure you're publicizing what you're doing within your organization. I don't mean you got to go out and publicize that, oh gosh, we donated X amount to Girl Scouts. But I think it's really great if you can create that culture of giving within your organization. I know Intuit was doing a fun little competition within their team with how much people were donating and how many hours of time they were giving to organizations, which I thought was a great idea. maybe offer to match donations if you can. I think the last thing I'm really going to point out on this page, and again, I encourage you to look at the infographic here, is now is a great time to use surveys and polls to engage with your teams and understand where they were at pre-COVID and where they're expecting to be post, or where they're at currently. I think the hardest thing about surveys, employee engagement surveys, is getting your teams to actually take them. But right now, many of us have more time on our hands, or we're willing to do it in off hours. And I think that's a great way to get your team engaged and to really start, not only that, but start building some KPIs for yourself and knowing, hey, our engagement is at this level. We have X percentage of people that rate our culture as, positive, or whatever that may be. Great time to pull them on your values and figure out, are we living our values? Does everybody ascribe to these still? So again, that was a big one. And Google Poll is free. If nothing else, there's a lot of different survey tools out there, but just get something out there and start. Lastly, I think, having a C-level host a virtual meetup or a Q&A or a coffee meeting can always be really engaging, and encourage submissions within the marketing, to marketing, or having an employee takeover of your social media. Again, different ways of engaging and getting people excited about being a part of your team. All right, well, that covers it. I know there was a lot there. I really appreciate it. John, if you'll hit my last slide for me. I think ultimately, takeaways here, it's a great time to reflect on what's working and what's not. It's also a great time to just look at your strategy from a macro standpoint and check in with your team, see how they're doing. And then lastly, the thing I'll say, I'd be remiss if I didn't make at least one small pitch for us. So if you still are having trouble, deciding on an interview process or upgrading your interview process, you want help training other employees on how to do that, setting parameters, building rubrics, we do all of that. We also do onboarding and handbook review. We do salary benchmarking as well. So if you're not sure if you're paying your people where you'd like to be in terms of other Idaho companies or other industry standards, we do use a proprietary software and can tell you how you stack up. So thanks again. And I'm going to turn it over. Well, I'm really curious as to what's going on with this Aussie tracker, but Pete's going to take it away from here.
Aussie tracker, we'll have to wait. We do have a question from Jessica Anderson. Jessica, do you want to address your question? And if she doesn't get on here in a second.
I gave you your awkward silence by accident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the problem with having multiple screens, is I'm trying to figure out where my mouse was.
No worries.
Anyway, so I work for the Amalgamated Sugar Company. I work with our HR in a lot of areas, but mostly I'm in communications, and I do a lot of work with trying to build company culture. I'm on our employee committee. So one of the question I basically had is, we're kind of an old school culture. I mean, we're 120 something year old company, and it's really hard to get us moving into a digital age. And it's also, trying to shift our culture is kind of like trying to turn the Titanic. So I just didn't know if there were some ideas for onboarding for people who aren't necessarily comfortable with digital yet, and also some ideas that are good for bigger companies or bigger teams.
Yeah, great question, Jessica, and I appreciate you asking it. And it really it's hard to build or give tools for every sort of company, because I get it. Having a company that has over 100 years of a history, and how many people do you have in your organization? I'm curious.
Well, our company-wide, we have about 1,600 employees, but I was thinking, more specific. Our corporate office has about 90, which is much more manageable. We're kind of in that 500 mark for our salaried employees. So people who like working in the factories are more like an hourly position. So but specifically we try to work on things I try to work on things for our corporate office crew, which is about 90.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, and I think that that definitely impacts things. And ultimately, you can't force a decision, right? You can't force somebody to say, okay, we're changing our values today, right? we get that, and that's definitely not what we want to be recommending. But I think ultimately, COVID is forcing organizations to kind of heed to the change or die sort of mentality. And, when it comes to, you mentioned, it's hard to get this older organization to adapt a digitally focused policy. And unfortunately, I think, one thing I'd point out, and I'm sure you get this probably more than anybody else, is if we don't, then what's the alternative? We have to wait months and months to hire. And what is that costing the business? I think ultimately, those are some of the things I would start with and then start to uncover, especially if you're feeling like, gosh, the executive team or there's some leaders that are really kind of up against this. What would be the cost? And whether that's obviously if we can tie it to a dollar amount, that's going to be point number one, but also what's the opportunity cost? You're leaving talent on the table, or you're, leaving talent on the table in the terms of other employees may start looking elsewhere because they feel uncertain or unstable with their work. And I think those are other considerations to kind of think about and bring to teams that are still kind of perpetuating the idea of, it's okay, we're just going to stick with what we've always done. In terms of tactile ideas, I'd be happy to kind of sidebar with you afterwards and get a better understanding of your culture. And I don't want to just throw out ideas right now, just to throw out ideas, because it ultimately is going to really be impactful only if it makes sense to you and to your company individually. So let's talk outside of here, and definitely happy to kind of sidebar and have more idea brainstorming.
Yeah, Carter, he was another gentleman from my organization was on the call earlier who is in the HR department, and he would be a great person to talk with in that regard as well. Our team is doing a lot of really good work. It's just, I know that there are a lot of tools that we could probably start implementing.
For sure. And it's hard right now. Is like a great example. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call feel the same way, right? It's like everything's being thrown at you, and it's like you get analysis paralysis. It's like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed by how many different options and opportunities are out there that I'm just going to stick with what I know. And so, sometimes it just takes really teasing out, all right, what makes sense for us and what are easy, digestible things that we can change and implement to lead us to success. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Pete. And thanks again, Jessica, for that question. I really appreciate it. Looks like there's some hot topics going on in the chat function, so I appreciate that. But Pete, I'll have you wrap us up unless there are other questions out there.
Sure, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I've been watching the conversations, and it's really good to see this be really interactive. And I'm not seeing any more questions come up here, but certainly if you guys have questions, please throw them in as quick as you can. I'm not sure that we have time. I want to be conscious of your guys' time, and you have other things to do. We will address your questions, so please throw them in. But I would just be banging my head if I didn't let Aussie Tracker come throw one more in. So Aussie, you got anything else, or you good?
Well, I'm Maury Finkel. Finkel Enterprises, been selling used software and watches since '86. And I just want to say, wow, what a tremendous webinar. Great content, great ideas, great people. And I can't wait to take these concepts back to Jersey and implement them with my team. But I got to get back to the craps tables. You guys, good luck. Thanks so much for the webinar. Beautiful.
Maury, much appreciated. A great way to send us out. Guys, yeah, I hope, if anything today, that this has been fun and engaging, that it's been a little bit different. And, we're hopeful that we've given you plenty of ideas how to develop business or personal strategy and overcoming these tough times. Again, it's time to make yourself recession proof. This is going to happen again. It will happen again. I know that's putting fear out there in itself, but learn how to understand your fears, overcome them. It's going to happen again. But next time, maybe you'll have some better ideas of how to move forward, with more ease. And lastly, we really hope that we instill that, we're here to help your team in any way that we can. Again, we're going to follow up with the questions. If you have any other questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'd be happy to have that conversation. Other than that, I'll send it out and say cheers to everybody. Cheers. All right, thank you.
Cheers, everyone. See ya. Thanks for joining us.